Hello, I'm Victor Scargill, Culinary Director for Atelier Fine Foods and Catering and Boisset Collection. Today what we're going to make is we're going to make a Raymond Estate rack of lamb with some forbidden rice, some beautiful Romanesco cauliflower from our garden. We'll finish it with a little bit of lamb jus and some red Russian kale. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to get our rice going. Forbidden rice, if you've never heard of it before, is a rice that originates from China. The Emperor of China back in the day forbade everybody to have this rice except for himself. I love this rice because it has got a great flavor. It's got a nuttiness to it, kind of like a wild rice. It's got, what I'm doing there, just so you can see, is the pan was too hot. So I just used a little bit of water to cool the pan down. So we don't want to put the butter in there too quickly. So a little tip for you, adding a little bit of water, the water will evaporate and we're in good shape. So the Emperor of China didn't want anybody else to have the rice. It was called forbidden rice. Luckily today we're able to have it. The rice, you can see, beautiful black or dark purple in color. It's got a richness to it. It's healthy. It's got a nuttiness to it, so it's a great starch that adds a lot of complexity to a dish as well. So I like to start with whole butter. I'm using a butter called Plougre. It's a French butter. It's high in fat. I think it's over 80% fat. So I've got that. It's melting down there. Let's talk about a term that a lot of chefs use called sweating. So sweating is low heat. It's something that a lot of cooks, young cooks, old cooks struggle with. What I want to do is at low heat, I want to pull out the flavor of the onions. If I was to have it on high heat, a sauté, which means to jump, it's going to caramelize those onions, but I want that flavor to come out. By sautéing or searing those onions, it's not allowing that to happen. I want the flavor of the onions to come out, so I'm going to help that process as well with a little bit of salt. That's going to draw the moisture out of the onions. Okay, so I'm getting all the flavor of the onions to come out. I'm sweating them in butter. I'm going to add my forbidden rice. And forbidden rice is 1 part rice to 1 3/4 part liquid. There's a lot of liquid involved in forbidden rice. So we've got the rice in there. I'm going to toast the rice now a little bit, similar to like you'd make risotto. The other thing I like about forbidden rice is you don't have to babysit it like risotto. When you make risotto, you would do the similar process, but then you need to stand there and stir it as you're adding the liquid. For this, we don't have to do that. We can add our liquid, we can cover it with parchment paper or a cartouche, and just basically let it simmer until it's ready. And it takes a long time to cook. For this amount of rice, it would probably take 45 minutes to an hour. So when we're cooking, we're making larger batches of it, and it takes quite a while to cook, so you have to be patient. That's why we're going to start with that in our cooking process. If you're trying to prepare for a dinner party, you can make this rice, cook it 90% of the way till it still has a little bite to it, lay it out on a sheet tray so it cools nice and even, then come back tomorrow when you're ready to serve your guests, put a little bit of stock. You can use vegetable stock or chicken stock, whatever your preference is. A lot of times I'll cook with vegetable stock because there's a lot of vegetarians out there, and it is something that's so delicious for them. So the next day you come, get your pot, put a little bit of stock on the bottom, that way there's some moisture there, add your rice to it and warm it up nice and slow, finish the cooking process, and you don't have to wait. Because a lot of times when we're cooking, we don't have an hour to make the forbidden rice all a minute or to the minute when our guests are arriving, so that's a great way to do it. I've got some wonderful bay leaves here as well from our garden. We are very fortunate to have Joe Papendick, our farmer, so he grows a lot of wonderful stuff for us. We've got some nice fresh bay leaves here. The other thing I like to do is I like to add a little bit of acid to this because it is so rich. We've got some white wine. A lot of times I'll use Pernod or Pastis as well. It's another great thing to add in there. It's got that fennel or licorice flavor to it. It's going to add a little bit of that to it and let that cook out. Once that reduces down, once that alcohol cooks out, reduces down, and still has some acid in there, then we'll add our liquid. Again, and we're going to add about 1 3/4 to 1 on the forbidden rice. And then we're going to cover it so it doesn't dry out on top with a piece of parchment paper. And we're going to let it simmer until it's nice and tender. So the next step that we're going to do while our rice is cooking is we've got our beautiful rack of lamb here. And I mentioned our farmer, Joe Papendick, and so he raised these beautiful animals here. So we know, the big deal today I think is transparency. We know what they've eaten, we know what they've been given or what they've not been given. So we've got these beautiful rack of lamb and we're going to season them. So one of the most important things with seasoning is making sure your hands are dry. So I've got dry hands. I'm going to season from a little bit of an elevated position. That way it's a nice even coat. You can see there's not a wad of salt in any area. It's getting nice even seasoning like a salt shaker. So we've seasoned it with salt, kosher salt. I like to use kosher salt because I can feel it. Sometimes, you know, growing up we had iodized salt at home and it's super fine, you can't feel it, so you don't know exactly how much you've got on your hands when you're seasoning. So we use kosher salt. You can see I've seasoned all around with kosher salt. I'm going to season with black pepper now. I got a nice pepper mill here. It's kind of coarse, and I'm just going to season on part of it. A lot of times we talk about ratios and black pepper and white pepper. For this I like to use black pepper. For other things like fish, a lot of times we'll use white pepper, but the idea again is balance. Whether you use black pepper or white pepper, you've got to have a balance of it. One hits you in the back of the mouth, the other one hits you in the front of the mouth, so it's always about a balance. So I've got this black steel pan. I love to use these. They're easy to work with. They work on induction, they work on gas, and I've got some grapeseed oil. I like to use grapeseed oil as well. It's a local product, or a product that's right here in the Napa Valley. I use it because it is neutral in flavor, a little bit of fruit flavor to it, but it has a high smoke point, which means I can get this pan smoking hot without it burning, because the last thing we want to have happen is for our pan to burn, or the oil to burn before we've even seared our meat in the pan. So we want to make sure that this is nice and hot. We can test it by, nope, we're not there yet. A lot of people ask, well, why did I wrap the bones with aluminum foil? It's for a presentation purpose, so we're going to sear this lamb, we're going to put it in the oven on a high temperature, and we don't want those bones to burn up. So by wrapping them in foil, it protects them and just creates a nice, better presentation to the dish. Crank our heat up a little bit. A lot of times when people are searing things, they stick. The reason they stuck to the pan is because the pan wasn't hot enough, or they used a fat that wasn't going to allow them to be at that high of a temperature or high of a smoking point. So, no, we're not quite there. So now that our pan's nice and hot, our grapeseed oil, it's smoking hot, obviously, we're going to put our lamb in. And I'm testing it, that's how you know if it's hot enough. And what I want to do is I'm going to set the lamb in the pan and I'm going to lean it away from myself so I don't splatter that fat, and the bones out of the pan. So again, going in the pan this way, that way if it does splatter, it goes away from me, I don't burn myself. Fat side down. I'm going to turn my heat down now, or actually I can move it over to here, it's a little bit cooler surface, and cook it nice and slow. You see this fat cap here? If we have it on too high a heat, it's going to sear, and then we're going to have this fatty tissue there. But we want it on a little bit lower, hot going in, and then turn the heat down, let it sit over there and render that fat. Once that's all nice and rendered down, then we're actually going to be cooking or basting that rack of lamb in its own juices, almost like a confit in the pan. So we'll sear it and render that fat all the way around it. When that's done, then we'll pop it in the oven for a few minutes. For a double rack like this, probably 6 or 7 minutes. I'll go into an oven at 400 degrees, and then we'll pull it out. We'll let it rest, slice it, and plate it. So the next step that we did was we took some of this beautiful Romanesco cauliflower from our farm here, cut off some of the florets, took the fat that was in the pan from the rack of lamb, and just sauteed it in there. We've got some amazing red Russian kale as well. It's one of my favorite greens. We'll add that to the pan. And we're not going to put over very much heat at all, just a little bit of heat. Slide it back over here for a second. We add a touch of salt to the last few steps of our dish. Add a little bit of butter to the pan, right? Julia Child, fat is flavor, so it's a nice little touch there just to get the kale to wilt a little bit. This kale you could eat it raw as a salad, super nutritious, so we don't want to cook it down too much. We want it to have that texture. Here's our forbidden rice that we cooked. You can see that, beautiful purple color. Nice and light. We're going to check it for our seasoning. I love it. Our lamb rack came out of the oven. You can see a beautiful sear all the way around. Still nice and rare. We want to serve it on the rare side. So to finish our plate, we've taken a little bit of natural lamb jus here, and here's a neat little trick. We have one of these in our knife bag or our toolkits all the time. So we've got this beautiful sauce. We're just going to give it a last little strain before it goes on the plate to get any of those last little impurities out. It's going to look better on the plate and taste better as well. So to finish our plate, take some of our forbidden rice, and you want to leave it loose. You want to, like the same consistency as risotto, where it's just going to pool out on the plate and it almost has a sauce of its own, which is another thing I love about it. Pools out, beautiful purple color. See that? I mean, that's just a beautiful color. We have a little bit of a thyme sprig in there. We don't take that out. We've got our cauliflower here and our kale. You can see just getting the color to turn a little bit. Get that back over there. And again, this stuff's got beautiful color. We don't want to cook it down too much, just so it's got a little bit of crunch to it still. Take a little bit of that raw flavor out. And it's going to create a different flavor profile as well by giving it a little bit of heat to it and seasoning it. The last thing that we're going to do is our lamb rack. Put this lamb rack here. And you see how the bones, because we wrapped them in the foil, they stay nice and white. They just show up real nice on there. And then when you're going to cut the lamb, you got to remember the shape of it. So it's going to go down into on an angle. I'm going to go straight down, angle through. We'll let it sit for a second. Hold it out of the oven. Let it rest for a few seconds. That way the blood doesn't all run out. It stays nice and juicy and moist. I'm going to crisscross those on there. We've got our sauce that we just strained. Just a natural lamb jus. You can put a little bit of lemon thyme in there. Sometimes you can use rosemary if it's nice and fresh, but you don't want to overdo it, because this lamb especially, it's more of a grass and milk fed animal. So if you use something too strong like rosemary, it might overpower the animal. It might overpower it, and so that's what you're tasting instead of the delicious lamb that you've got. So a little bit of sauce, not too much, and then a little bit of gray salt. I like to use gray salt for meat. I've got Maldon salt that I use for fish, some black salt here. We can do a whole nother episode on salts because they add such a complexity of flavor. Nice thing to finish, and also some texture as well. So we've got this beautiful Raymonds Estate rack of lamb, forbidden rice, some Romanesco cauliflower, red Russian kale. There's a little bit of tatsoi in there as well, I just noticed, and a beautiful natural lamb jus. Again, Victor Scargill, Culinary Director, Boisset Collection. Bon appetit.